all, thank you all for coming. And evening is always hard. If I don't fall asleep, you might fall asleep. It's okay, don't worry about it. So I'm just thrilled that you're all joined our volunteer corps. We need you. We're really going to make a difference. We've not had one before, so it's very exciting. Again, my name is Anna Slafer. I actually joined the museum 4 months before the first museum opened. So I've been here 17 years, and it's been exciting. It was exciting to be involved in with the startup of that museum and then the exhibitions that we did. And I have a background in museum education, so I don't have a spy background, but as our old executive director said, I've spent enough time here that I could work in the intelligence community just with my base of knowledge. So what we're going to do today is, as Kia said, I'm going to walk you through the museum, and this is what's going to take place, all right? So this is the fire hose version. I'm going to be telling you about the way things are structured, why we made decisions we did a bit, but it's also, I'm not even going to tell you nearly all the stories that we're covering. I'm going to tell you a bunch of them, but it's still going to be intense. And Kia's put together some great materials for you, so I think that will help you. And as you go on a tour, and we're still in installation phase. We're going to be working up till the day we open. So, but we're moving along, so it's exciting. A really great mural. Maybe I'll run down with you afterward. Went up today, so I'm really excited to see that. So this is the fire hose version, and every day things change. So some of these slides, you don't even need them anymore because we've got the real thing. But I'm going to walk you sort of through the floor plan. You obviously all know the lobby. Just to talk for a minute about the things in the lobby, we have 3 iconic artifacts in the lobby. One is the turtle, which is it's a replica of America's first submarine. Exactly, you want to put it up here? Okay. America's first submarine during the Revolutionary War, and the cool thing about it was that it was made by an organization called Hans House Studios, based up in Massachusetts, and they work with students, art and design students, to use real, authentic techniques and materials to recreate equipment or tools and things from the past. So this is one of the things they took on, and it's just a beautiful object. I really love looking at it. We have our Bond car. Oh, that's what I want to ask you. How many of you have been to the old museum? Pretty much. Okay. Most of you? All right. Because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how it's different. Not that it's critical for you to know, but we did have our Aston Martin DB5, which was not used in the movie, but it was used several years later in the promotion of the film of Goldfinger. But it is going to run through its paces. It has some special effects that it does. And anybody recognize this gentleman? George Washington, yes, our first spy master, sort of hidden there. And of course our store. And then we have the drone in the lobby, and the Amber drone. And we also have our Neanderthal. And I like to sort of say that, it's almost like 2001: A Space Odyssey, you remember, and it's sort of like the generations looking across, the first surveillance, looking across at contemporary surveillance. So it's sort of, that's one way we sort of we describe it. But this is how people will go up to the 5th floor. So the museum is on 2 floors. The total footage of the museum is about 25,000 square feet. So what is the new museum about, and how is it different than Spy 1? So I'm going to talk about that as we go through it, but there are 2 floors just like there were in the other museum. When we sat down to think about how are we going to change the museum, make it new, we brought together historians and practitioners, and we did a lot of thinking about how did we want to reorganize things. We also learned a lot from our guests over 17 years, once the museum opened. And so one of the things we thought about were the content takeaways. What are they going to learn about in the new museum from a content perspective that they didn't learn about necessarily before? And the big thing is just basically that spying is an integral part of human nature. And that the other museum really focused on human intelligence, the great spy stories, collecting information. But the new museum, we wanted to go beyond human intelligence. We wanted to look at more of the science and technology. We wanted to look at analysis, which is a major part, the major part of the intelligence community, and we hadn't even addressed it in the previous museum. So we really are looking beyond to look at intelligence much more holistically. We also want to get at the fact that spying is ethically murky, and that our perceptions of intelligence are often shaped by popular culture. That's what, yes?
This is a question that I've had that's been sort of growing, and maybe you're the one to ask it. Why did you choose the term spying and not intelligence?
We use them both, and we use them kind of interchangeably. So we do say spy, we do say espionage. When we're talking about espionage in general with human intelligence collection, we focus on spying. But we do refer to intelligence officers as spies because the public sort of knows that. Though we talk about that in the first.
Marketing.
It's easier though. In the first gallery, we say what is a spy, and we make a separation between agents and assets and professional intelligence officers. So we are trying to help people understand the difference. But it got very complicated. But we do say intelligence officers. You'll see it as we go through. So. And then the last bit is that we want people to understand that spying does matter, that everyone does have a stake in it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and what the role the public can play and does play a bit. So in addition to that, we set educational goals. We wanted our exhibits to communicate certain things, and one of the things is we wanted to foster visitors' abilities to be informed consumers of intelligence in the news that they're seeing every day. We wanted them to understand their civic role in the oversight process, and we wanted them to, as I said, be aware of spy fiction's impact on shaping their views of spying, real spying, and then also as educators, we wanted people to think about to get some experience working with their skills of observation, which is what intelligence officers do, reconnaissance officers, analysis, creative problem solving, conflict resolution, and communication. So those are some of our other goals. But we have a lot of competition in this city, and there's a lot of things for visitors to do. I actually counted not that long ago, and within a 1.5 mile radius, there are 40 museums and monuments. So people have a lot of ways they want to spend their time, and museums are voluntary experiences. They're educational, but they're voluntary. So we need to think about that when you're having people stand up and you don't want to book on the wall. You want to access the way people learn in different methods. So we tried to take that into account as we were designing the exhibits. So I like to think of it as we want people to have delight and insight of the content we're trying to portray. And speaking of portraying, so how do you create delight? One of the ways to create delight is with novelty and bringing history to life in interesting ways. We have our spy master, Francis Walsingham, who was the spy master to the head of state, Queen Elizabeth I. And so we bring them to life. I think the videos will be running downstairs, but we bring their stories to life. We also have some fun. This was actually the air duct was our single most popular interactive in the old museum. We expect it to be the same here. This is Jackie Isle, our director of youth education, testing out down at our fabricators our new air duct. We also wanted to bring the stories to life in different ways. We have we tell a 5th century intelligence story, and we are using, we worked with a company in Brooklyn, Chinese Theater Works, who does the technique of shadow puppetry, and so we're actually going to tell that story through shadow puppets, through a video of that. So again, trying to find different ways to bring things to life. So you've got the maps. I'm going to just give you a brief overview. One of the easier way to think about how the museum is developed is people start on the 5th floor. The 5th floor is about the how. How do we do spying? How, who are the people? What are the processes? What are the artifacts, the gadgets that are used? And then the 4th floor is more about why do we spy? Though to be honest, we really cover all those topics on every floor. But it's just a bit of an easier way to do it. So when I say how do we spy, so the museum's divided into 4 main galleries. and each gallery is designed around a theme. So the first gallery, you come off the elevators, you go to the briefing center, we'll talk about the RFID badge. You'll pick up your badge, there's a 5-minute briefing film that gives you an overview of the museum, or mostly and particularly the 5th floor. And then this first gallery is called Stealing Secrets. And it is divided into three sections. We start with Spies and Spy Masters, the spy stories, the classic human collection. So we start there. Then we talk about tech ops, the Qs, the people who support the spies with the gadgets that they make. So we talk about that here. And then the last area is called Looking, Listening, and Sensing. So we go from the human level to the 70,000 foot plus level, looking at the high-tech materials that are used to collect intelligence. And I'm going to go through this more in depth. So that's this area. Once you've collected all this information, or intelligence community has collected it, what do they do with it? They have to make sense of this to turn it into useful information. So this gallery is called Making Sense of Secrets, and we start with codes, partly because codes could go in many places, but making and breaking codes sort of begin to analyze information. This is where it fit. That's part of why it's there. The second gallery is analysis. I told you we didn't have anything on that before. So it's how information is analyzed. I'll talk more about that. And we end with kind of a decision room. And this is to get people thinking about the role of intelligence with that decision makers are the ones making the decisions about intelligence. So we can go into that a little bit. So that's the second gallery. The third gallery is covert action. When you've got the information, you've collected it, you have analyzed it, well, what do you do with it? There are several options. One of the main things is to go, not a main thing, but one of the things you can do is go abroad and influence events abroad, and that's covert action, through covert action. So that's what this is. There are 7 areas in covert action, from propaganda to lethal action to deception. We're going to talk about that. So that's this floor, and then you're going to go downstairs, and there's 2 galleries. This gallery, which is on the far side, that's the second half of what intelligence agencies do with information they've collected. They can go abroad and influence events, or they protect the homeland. So this is counterintelligence, counterespionage, counterterrorism. So we'll talk about that. But then this gallery is devoted to stories that talk about how spying has shaped history. Again, that's through the whole museum, but this is a little more focused on that. And there's a theater. It starts, you come down the stairs, there's a theater. It's kind of a rotunda-shaped design. Then you can go into this gallery, which is called An Uncertain World. And then you go out, you'll have your RFID, you'll be debriefed, so to speak, and then go down the stairs to the store, of course. So that's a quick overview. As I said, we really thought long and hard about how are we going to communicate this information to people. So this just gives you a sense of the way the non-label material is spread out throughout the museum. There's films and media. We have a lot of films and media. We have a lot of digital interactives. We have physical interactives that you can do. We have some audio, and then the RFID, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, how to spy. This is sort of the first floor. You come in, as I said, you're going to be, there's a holding area where you're going to be getting your RFID badge, which I'll talk about, and then there's a 5-minute film. As you walk off the elevator, this is not up yet, but it should be up in a few weeks. We've got this huge mural, which Kia will show you that we're getting, there's a small version, but it's getting people, if any of you who are readers have thought about this idea of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is what makes every Oscar-winning movie an Oscar-winning movie. But it looks at how you tell a story. What's the best way to tell a story? And when you think about our visitors, they're coming from the known world into an unknown world, a very different world. They're crossing that threshold. So we want to prepare them to think about that. So we have this mural, and you can see it here, but hidden throughout the mural are all sorts of little Easter eggs, things that we can use for scavenger hunts or things like that, whether it's acoustic kitty, a CIA cat, or it's a wanted poster or the Aston Martin. So as you look more closely at anything, and that's your skills of observation, you'll be able to see more. So I mentioned the RFID badge, and up here. So we had in the old museum the Living Your Cover Interactive, where you were waiting for the film and you adopted a cover identity, and then you went through the film and you were tested by a computer interactive to see if you could memorize your cover, if you could sort of live your cover. We've taken that to the next level. When we started the museum, that technology for ramping that up was not around, but now technology does exist. So you're going to get a badge. You're going to have a personalized cover identity that's going to be assigned to you. You will get a mission, and you're going to go throughout the museum. There's about 11 or 12 stops, interactives, where you're going to learn different kinds of tradecraft. And then at the end, when the debriefing center, you're going to get a very quick summary of how well you did. We're going to be tracking you the whole time to see what did you complete, how well did you do, and you'll get a sense of how well you did. So that's, and then when you go home, there's a microsite that you can get a much more in-depth understanding of how you did, and hear an intelligence officer talk to you about how the spies that you, the skills that you did well in, how they've applied in different situations. So the briefing film, we're in the process of working on that now. It's going to be an overview of the floor. And then we enter Stealing Secrets, the first exhibit in Stealing Secrets. So we've got galleries and then we've got exhibits. The first exhibit in the Stealing Secrets gallery is Spies and Spy Masters. And one of the things I didn't want to forget to mention is that we are very conscious of being an independent organization. Many people think we're part of the Smithsonian. We've spent many years trying to make sure people understand we are not part of the government. We don't represent the intelligence community. We are an independent organization. And as such, we don't use words like honor or celebrate. We're not here to celebrate the intelligence community. We're not here to honor them. We're here to look at objectively what they've done and look at the role that intelligence has played in shaping history and contemporary times and getting people to understand it more. So I just stress that because it's very important that you understand that that's not our role as a museum, as an educational institution. So the first exhibit, Spies and Spy Masters. So here we have, we focus on human intelligence gathering, and we have 6 spies that we've looked at. They're not all spies, if we're looking at the right definition, but so we have 6 people, and they each represent different time period, a different type of spy. They have different geographical locations. So one of the people we focus on is Morton Storm, who's a contemporary spy, and we wanted to bring these people to life in different ways. So we kind of call the 6 areas islands. They each have their island, and there's a media presentation for each of them. So Morton Storm is a wild and crazy guy. He is Dutch. We went out to Denmark to film him, and he's Danish rather, I'm sorry. So he's going to tell you his own story. He's got artifacts, and he was someone who was involved in the hunt for Anwar al-Awlaki. He was he became a radicalized Muslim. He has an amazing story to tell, and he's going to tell it to you himself. Mata Hari is another focus, and the way we look at Mata Hari is the influence of pop culture on both how women are looked at in intelligence, but also just spies in general. Just we look at her role as a spy. She was a spy. She wasn't a very good one, but she did do some spying. So we tell her life story, but then we have on the back we have real women who work in intelligence today talking about. Some talk about the Mata Hari effect. Has it affected them in their work? Has it not? And we have artifacts on the back. Then we go back to Elizabethan England. This is Queen Elizabeth, the head of state, and her spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham. We went to England to film these 2 great actors who recreate their roles, and we're trying to get at the relationship between the spy master and the head of state. It's part of it, and also tell some history about that time period. So you'll see there's 3 little vignettes that they enact. James Lafayette, we look at the Revolutionary era, and James, who was enslaved and volunteered to work for Pierre Lafayette, and was critical in bringing back information from the British that helped win the Battle of Yorktown. So we talk about his story, and we also talk about the fact that we don't know, there's not a lot written about slaves, but also this period of time and this gentleman. So we can only speculate about what he actually did. A lot of people think he was a double agent. He wasn't. That's part of the confusion of the term double agent. But we do want to raise some of the issues about, well, what did he do? So that's the angle we go with here. Dmitry Bistrolyotov, he is Stalin's Romeo spy. He was one of Stalin's great spies during the 20s and 30s. Into the 40s, he brought back critical information to Stalin about the Germans and what they were doing during World War II, before World War II. And he is often talked about as the model for James Bond, one of the models for James Bond. He seduced many women. And he talks about a lot of his stories. We actually have his memoirs. So we have an actor, if any of you watched The Americans, the TV show The Americans, Kosta Ronin, who played the Russian in that. Actually, we flew out to LA and he wanted to be filmed as Bistrolyotov, so he's our actor for this one. So we're excited about that. So we talk about, he was eventually thrown into the Gulag by Stalin, and he was there for 15 years, and in this vignette we have him reflecting on his life, looking back from the Gulag about his days as a spy. So that's what we talk about with this one. And then our last is two spies, Mossad Ben Youssef and Mossad Youssef and Gonen Ben Yitzhak. Gonen, this gentleman right here, was a member of Shin Bet, Israeli intelligence. Mossad is Palestinian. He was the son of the founder of Hamas, and he eventually became a spy for Israel. So this is about the spy-handler relationship and this issue of trust and betrayal and the things that you need to think about when you do this work. So that's what they talk about. So surrounding them we wanted to give people a sense of all the fabulous artifacts we have. One of our board members, Keith Melton, has generously donated his private collection of intelligence espionage artifacts, and he had the largest privately held collection, and we now quadrupled our collection when we moved to the new museum. So we're able to show a number of really incredible artifacts, a lot of them related to real cases, which is very exciting. Robert Hansen, Ames, we've got some of their artifacts related to those cases. So we've divided this sort of wall of artifacts into 5 sections based on the artifact, how it's used. And we want to put people a little bit in the shoes of the people who have to solve the problems and come up with the gadgets to help them do their work. And so we've got escape and evasion artifacts, concealment devices, clandestine photography, and surreptitious entry. So those are, and for each of those we look at one person who kind of embodies that characteristics. Again, different time periods, different geographic locations. So we've divided it up that way. And in here you'll get your first RFID interactives. So we're focusing on tradecraft skills, and we're also focusing on some personal skills, personality skills that are required to do this work. These, I don't know if you'll be able to do any of these today, but we are going to be testing some of them very soon. So, as I said, you're going to get a cover identity, you're going to get a mission, you're going to be assigned to a country, and you have to blend in and fit in. And if you had to create a disguise for to meet someone or as part of your mission, you will get briefed on your mission, and this is, you'll actually be able to create a disguise. Now, you create a disguise, but we want people to think that this isn't just costumes for movies or fun. So you're going to be assessed by how well you fit in to the country and the space you're going to. So you're going to be assessed on the quality of your disguise, how well you transformed yourself, but also how accurately you fit in. You'll also, there's an interactive on pocket litter, things that you need to have with you to make sure you're living your cover, and if you choose the right things or the wrong things, depending on where you're going, so getting you to think about that a little more. And then you're going to do some various activities that relate to your mission. So you're going to get skills and learn and do some other interactive activities. So I said, in addition to traditional tradecraft disguise, we've got some code breaking, we've got different things like that. We also want to get at the qualities you need to do this work, and part of that is being dealing with fear and risk. It's a risky job if you're a clandestine officer. Trust, we talk about your ability to sort of live your cover. So we have interactives that deal with those things also. So we've left this area and we're going now into looking, listening, sensing. So this, as I said, this moves to the 70,000 foot plus level. This is where we deal with the high technology. And we have a lot of, well, we look at basically 4 different kinds. They're called the INTs. They're the intelligence collection methodologies that are used. So we have image intelligence called IMINT. We have signals intelligence, collecting signals, SIGINT. We have open source, that's all the newspapers and things, that's OSINT. And then we have the sort of more high-tech stuff, MASIT, measures, signatures, radar, chemicals, vibrations, things like that. And then we tell this sort of story that integrates it all, which is about the Glomar Explorer. This gives you a bird's eye view of that gallery. And one of the things we wanted to do here was, again, think about the people who, the engineers, the scientists, the technologists tasked with solving a problem. So, let me go here. So we wanted you to think about the fact that the things that are made are solving a problem. So for instance, for image intelligence, what was the challenge? The challenge is we need to get higher, go faster, and get clearer images. And we have several stories that address that. We start with every one of these sections is early history, then we sort of do middle Cold War history and a little bit more toward the present. So for this one, which is IMINT, we start with balloons and pigeons, and so we sort of talk about the early intelligence gathering. And then we go up to our big case study is Francis Gary Powers and the shoot down of the U-2 during the Cold War. Then we also go on to talk about the challenge of building the SR-71. And again, we look at it from a science and technology perspective. The material that they had to invent the material. They had to get the material, it was titanium. They had to invent the tools to work with the titanium. All the different things that go into thinking through a problem like this if you're going to try to get into, say, the Soviet Union when you can't send in an intelligence officer. So we look at that. For signals intelligence, we start with the black cabinets and letter opening in the Cabinet Noir in Richelieu's time. So we go back early. Our middle story is the Berlin Tunnel. And we're very lucky that we actually have a piece of the Berlin Tunnel, which we were able to purchase from a farmer in Berlin through the gracious help of the Allied Museum. So we have a very long piece of the tunnel, and we had it restored in Germany and then shipped here. We've only got a small piece of it on view because we couldn't fit the larger piece in the gallery. So that's an authentic artifact. And we are going to, you get a sense of how we're going to tell the story of the Berlin Tunnel, which was an effort to tap into Soviet military communications between East and West Berlin during the Cold War. So we'll talk about that story. And just to give you a bit of a sense of the attention to detail that you have to have when you're doing this. So this has just happened last week. So as you can see, we're going to have an officer, a mannequin up there. We had to find the uniform. Fortunately, someone who collects uniforms in Berlin is going to lend us a uniform. It had to be the right uniform for that time period. And then something as simple as, well, the street sign. Well, you have to know what was the street that the tunnel ran under. And we had one authentic street sign from the time, but that's not the right street. So the street was spelled, the actual street was spelled in 3 different ways. We had to get that correct, get the correct spelling from Germany. So it's every single thing, every word, every image requires a lot of thought as we're trying to make this as accurate as we can. And there'll be plenty of errors, and we're going to have to correct them, but that gives you a sense of sort of what we think about when we're doing this. The last section here is about 21st century eavesdropping, and we look at the NSA and the programs of PRISM, and just how is all this material gathered today. This is going to be it's going to be through an animation. So we're trying to take a complicated story, which is how does PRISM and intelligence gathering today work, and make it easier for people to understand. And this is kind of fun. You'll go down, you'll see there's a fun little interactive that helps you find the signal, which is the little story. So you'll see that. So we finished stealing secrets. Now what do you do with all that material? Well, you have to analyze it. You have to make it useful. And again, we start with code making and code breaking. Here we tell 3 stories, big stories. We tell the story of the Enigma. They're all World War II stories. We tell the story of the Battle of Midway and the breaking of the Midway Code. And then we tell the story of Purple, which was the Japanese diplomatic code, breaking that. And then we've got a whole wall filled with interactives. So all sorts of interactives that people of all ages can enjoy doing, again, to get your hands on and understand the concepts a little more. You can see this is going to be the whole wall that's devoted to different interactives. We've also got a film in here about breaking Enigma. And then again, a lot of interactives. And then you sort of flow into the analysis gallery. So when we started thinking about analysis, we thought, all right, this is going to be boring. How are we going to make this interesting for people? Because, analysis, it's just the word alone, unless you're really into it, it's going to be sort of boring. But in talking to our previous historian, who was an analyst at CIA, he views these things as analytic problems as secrets, mysteries, and puzzles. So that's how we decided to set up this gallery. And there's a case study on each of these topics. And for example, the puzzle. The puzzle is, the question is, why did it take so long to find Osama bin Laden? Something that the public is interested in. Why did it take so long? So we actually lead you through the 10-year hunt, working with one of the women who was in this, Cindy Storr, who was part of the Sisterhood, the women who actually worked on the bin Laden case. So she leads you through the process. It's a huge interactive. And we also try to teach what intelligence analysts use so that they can think, so they don't bring bias into their thinking about problems. So they use things called structured analytic techniques. And this is one of them. So you can think of them sometimes as brainstorming techniques, but also ways to prevent bias. So this is called starbursting, and it's basically generating tons of questions based on who, what, when, where, why. Where's Osama bin Laden? And you'll generate a lot of questions, and that's what you're going to do in this interactive. And then we've got a full wall devoted to this. It's a sort of a 2-player game, but then the public can watch. And through the course of the interactive, over 10 years, you're going to quickly go through, you're going to hit dead ends, you're going to follow leads, you're going to uncover information to try to find out where Osama bin Laden is. So this is a very complicated interactive to make, and I think they're doing a really good job on it, our company, our firm. This is Cindy Storr. This gives you a sense of this is early drawings of what the interactive is going to look like. And then let me just quickly, I'll go back to the other. So mystery is the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this is actually a leadership analysis. So when 2 heads of state are going to meet, they look to their analysts to help them understand, get in the heads of, understand the backgrounds of the other head of state. So here we look at Kennedy and Khrushchev prior to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we actually have the analyses of Khrushchev by the CIA and the KGB's analysis of Kennedy. And so this, you're going to actually sort of be able to assess these men yourself. Part of the question is, would these 2 men be willing to start World War III over missiles in Cuba? And that's sort of the bigger question. So that's this section. And then the last section, secret, is about Hitler. What were Hitler's secret weapons? Hitler kept saying he had a secret weapon. The Brits didn't know what it was, and here you get to go through different kinds of intelligence analysis to find out, figure it out. You get to look at human source intelligence, you look at open source, and you look at some signals intelligence. And then you try to figure out that it was, ultimately you'll find out it was the V weapons. We're actually pretty excited. We actually have an original blueprint of the V weapons that will be on view, which is going to be quite cool. Then the last section in here, which I'm most excited about, is we call it mind games. And these are a bunch of games that look at cognitive biases. So they're fun things that sort of trap visitors in looking at the way they think about problems, whether the issue is confirmation bias. When you think like your enemy or your adversary thinks, if you think your adversary thinks like you, well then you might be getting into trouble when you do some analysis. So these are some of the biases that can happen. So there are different interactives that sort of are fun. One's a kind of a magician doing a shell game, and it gets you to think about inattention. It's called inattentional blindness, or you observing your environment as well as you should. So those are games right in this section. The last section here is the decision room. And this is we're very excited about this interactive. It's a 7-player interactive. And we actually have Mike Morrell, who is the former acting director of the CIA. He leads you through a red teaming exercise. And this is an exercise where you need to punch holes in a theory to make sure that what you're thinking about is the best or the correct answer, or as close as you can get. So here is Osama bin Laden in the Abbottabad compound? And what he walks you through is, we actually have a model of the compound, and you have to think about, well, maybe somebody else could have lived there. Could it have been a drug lord? Could it have been another Al-Qaeda leader? Could it have been a wealthy businessman? So he walks you through analyzing the compound. Why are the walls so high? Why do they burn their trash? Do they have communication to the outside? And then you learn about the confidence level that he had. He was with Obama at the time, and had to present his confidence level to the head of state. And so you'll learn about that process, about working with the head of state. So this sort of gives you a sense of this interactive. So we've finished making sense of secrets, and we're at our last gallery on this floor, which is covert action. As I said, there are 7 types of covert action that we deal with. Deception, paramilitary operations, which we call secret soldiers, political and economic action, exfiltration, sabotage, propaganda, lethal action. So as you go around, and in the center of the gallery is a theater where we have real intelligence officers talking about their experiences in the field where they can. So let's see. So these are old. This is the last gallery that's being developed, worked on. So not much is up there yet, but this gives you a sense of what we hope it's going to look like. Part of propaganda is looking at, again, a wide range of propaganda, and we look at Soviet active measure operations. We looked at the 2016 election. We look at children's books that were propaganda during the Cold War. We look at successes and failures. That's one of the things we want people to think about. So we sort of pair stories where we can. Part of that is we wanted to bring history to life by pairing a historic story with a contemporary story. So for instance, we have the Trojan horse in Greece, but we also pair that with the Trojan horse virus. And again, same concept that is timeless, but as technology changes, the way that the method is done would change. So this is Operation Zapata, which is the Bay of Pigs, it was a failed operation. And then we look at Operation Cyclone, which was the effort to push the Soviets out of Afghanistan. So we look at those two. This gives you a sense. There'll be more artifacts here. Two of our great interactives are here that people love. As I said, the air duct where you can crawl through, and hang time, which was in our Bond exhibit. Part of that is getting people to think about pop culture. In every movie, Bond is hanging from the bottom of a plane or whatever, and he's hanging there for hours. So how realistic is that? So you are lifted off the ground for about 2 inches off the ground, but it feels like more. The wind starts to blow, the bar you're holding on to starts to shake, and it's can you hang on for even 60 seconds? So again, trying to get people to sort of feel these questions rather than just reading about them. We look at deception. We actually go back to Genghis Khan and look at some of the deception techniques that the Mongols used. We have the Trojan horse, and we actually look at magicians and how magicians were used by the CIA to sort of think about different methods. This is what that was going to look like. The Trojan horse we tell again through an animated story, and that's going to be kind of projection mapped on a horse on the wall. We look at, for political action, we look at the attempted effort by Sidney Riley. Any of you used to watch Riley, Ace of Spies? Riley and Bruce Lockhart to try to overthrow the young Soviet, or the young government after the Bolshevik Revolution. So this was a failed plot. So we talk about that. And then the last room is a little theater, and it's got what I was telling you about. It's got 2 stories that are told by film. One is, I was telling you, the shadow puppet story, King Goujen and the Boiled Seas, which is an economic covert action. And then we also tell a story about Vietnam, the Vietnam War, called Operation Popeye, which is a cloud seeding operation, trying to use the monsoon season to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail so that they couldn't supply the troops. So we talk about that story. So that is the end of the 5th floor. I'm going to go to the 4th floor, but do you have any questions? I know I've been talking fast, I've been talking a lot. Go ahead.
This kind of, I think, relates to crowd control, where you have all these interactive things that everybody's going to want to play with.
Yeah.
How do we keep them moving? How can we,
I'm going to just, okay, he's running out the door. That's I just make the stuff. Michael will figure out how to deal with it. Some of it's going to be very challenging. Some of them are in very small spaces. And when we get down to Berlin, you'll see it's very tiny. You're going to have a very popular interrogation interactive. Most times we don't have more than 1 or 2 of anything. We've tried to do duplicates, and that's kind of why we try to do interactives where you could stand back and people can watch if they can't do it. Right. But we're gonna be learning a lot about crowd flow.
I mean, people are going to know what their covert identity is, and I mean they're going to want to earn points or whatever, for the.
Well, the good thing is we've also designed the museum so you can move around and shift around without sort of. The old museums, like you walked into the first room and it was really crowded, but now you walk into a huge room where there are many things for you to do, so you can circle back if it's busy. So we try to take that into account, but it's a small museum. It really is, relatively speaking. So it's going to be interesting, and we may have to adjust later. We may have to add more things.
I'm going to go with a good question. I think it's going to be baptism by fire. But it's also a lot of time that we step back and working. Volunteers are going to be critical along with staff. Whereas the old museum, we probably only had about 2, 3 post staff. This one we're going to triple that at this current museum. So we're definitely focusing on the visitor experience in the exhibit.
Cool.
Other questions? So I'm going to take a little break from pouring content at you to talk a little bit about how we've been developing and testing our interactives. So the company that is making our furniture and all the stuff that holds the objects is Maltby. They're based in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So every month we go up there and we see what they've been working on and approve things, and they've been developing a lot of our physical interactives. So this gives you a sense of what their place looks like, their workshop. This is testing one of our interactives for the MASIT section, where we talk about vibrations and we talk about sort of how you, this is supposed to be a Chinese drum. The idea is that this isn't quite the way they work, but basically you fill the drum with water, bury it in the ground, and as an army or would be approaching, you begin to see the waves of water start to move. So we sort of simulate that here to get you to think about this issue of what you can learn from vibrations, how you can collect intelligence from that information. So this is testing that as an interactive. You can see they start to bounce more. The bigger the army, the closer it gets, starts to bounce. This is our lock picking interactive. This is a supersize lock. And we tested this a number of different ways. To be honest, I think this is going to be challenging for many, many people. It's kind of difficult, but we also we did a lot of testing with people with a range of disabilities. This is someone who's in a wheelchair to see if they could, were they going to be able to move things around. We also tested it with people who are blind or have low vision, and we tried to make as many accommodations as we can. So, and we're going to be working on a tour for people who this is one of our testers who is blind, and she's testing the lockpicking interactive. So we will be having an audio described tour of the museum, a verbal description tour, and that will be ready to go at least with our staff. And then we're going to hopefully have an app where people can actually just listen to it. And hopefully eventually that will be for foreign visitors, foreign languages. We're going to have a few tactile artifacts. So we had, using 3D printing, we printed a few of our key artifacts so that you can touch them and get a sense of what they're like if you can't see them. So, we come down to the 4th floor. As I said, this is loosely, why do we spy? What's the impact of spying? How it shapes the world we live in? What's the impact it has had? And also, again, how is spying used as part of this to protect the homeland? I showed you the gallery. So the first gallery is the spying that changed history. And there are 7, you start with the film, so this you can bypass the film, but there is a film that sort of lays out the issues. And the first thing when you walk out is how spying launched the nation, how it launched our nation. One of our key artifacts is the letter that George Washington wrote setting up a first spy network. And so you'll meet George Washington. And there are a couple interactives. One is on secret writing and what kind of inks and things that Washington used to hide messages. And then another interactive on the Culper ring and how a message traveled from Long Island over the course of 12 days via whaleboat and horseback to get to Washington. So that's the first thing that you see when you exit the theater. This gives you a sense of the letter, and that's the Culper ring. He's not in a tent anymore. This is all old. And this is the secret writing interactive, which is still to go in. Then there are 6 exhibits in this gallery. So one of the things we wanted to look at, again, is successes and failures and the challenges of warning. How difficult it is to have actionable intelligence that gives someone there's rarely 100% certainty that you're going to be able to know exactly when something's going to happen. So we look at 2 failures. We look at Pearl Harbor. We look at 9/11. In the center of each of these exhibits, through this whole gallery, there's going to be a film on a different topic. So here we've interviewed analysts and people who do forecasting and analytic work to talk about the challenges of warning. That's this gallery. We look at World War II as a war that changed the world, and we look at some of the people involved. This is where we introduce people to the OSS and the predecessor to the CIA. And we look at different people. Donovan, Julia Child is in here. Some of the people involved in World War II related espionage. We also look at deception operations here. So we look at that. There's a film here. This exhibit's called Top Secret. And this is where we look at the balance, so to speak, between security and safety, sort of security and liberties, civil liberties. And we look at 2 case studies. We look at what happens when the government keeps a secret for many years, and what happens when a secret is revealed when someone doesn't want it to be revealed. So the secret kept is the story of the Rosenbergs and the atomic spies. So the Rosenbergs were the only spies that have been executed for espionage during the Cold War. We talk about that story. We have their son, Mike Meerpool, and we have historians talking about the result of keeping the Venona Project, which was an effort to break Soviet communications that was known about during the time, but it was not revealed in the trial. And partly because of that, the public has been unsure about guilt or innocence. So we talk about the ramifications to the public when a secret is kept. For the secret revealed, we start back in the 70s. We look at this issue of COINTELPRO with and the family jewels. That's when the FBI and the CIA sort of overstepped, and oversight was developed by Congress. And then we go up to Snowden. So that sort of covers that. And then we have 2 films here. We look at cyber as a tool, and this is very cool. This is sort of a traditional part of the exhibit. When you go in that room there, we're creating what we're calling an infinity room. So if any of you saw the Kusama exhibit at the Hirshhorn with all the mirrors, so we're trying to create that. And if it works, it will be, you'll walk into this space and you're going to feel like you're in the internet. You're sort of in the ether. And we have 3 cyber experts talking about the challenges of cyber forensics, the future of cyber, and they're going to be morphing, they're going to kind of be coming out of layers of code. So it's a small space. This is going to be one of the pinch points, we think. So, but we may just be pushing people through and they can get back in line, and we'll have to see how that works.
Teenagers are going to get off on that like a big.
Oh, yeah, we've got the make-out rooms, we know where they're yeah. So that's cyber. This is a little space on who would have called, who would have guessed. It's about people that you might not expect who would be involved in espionage. We do it by time period. So might be Harriet Tubman in the Civil War, Moe Berg in World War II, the baseball player, Shi-Pei Pu, Madame Butterfly, M. Butterfly. We look at, sort of, again, different people that are sort of unexpected. And this is where we have our pop culture section, because again, it has shaped how people view real intelligence. And there'll be a film, and this gallery is fun to go into just to see all the posters from all over the world. And we've got some artifacts in here going up to even Game of Thrones. So some of the pop culture gadgets for stuff. So the last gallery is called An Uncertain World. And that's, again, how do intelligence agencies protect against threats at home? And what happens when intelligence or security goes too far? So that's this whole area here. And it's, again, composed of, I think, 6 different topics. So for those of you who, at the old museum, we had our Wilderness of Mirrors room where we dealt with moles and traitors. So this is this area. We look at traitors, we look at Hansen, we look at Ames, we look at Kim Philby and the Cambridge Five. The exciting thing is now, unlike before, we actually have artifacts related to those people. We have all their handcuffs. We have some artifacts, personal materials that belong to them. So it again ratchets up the meaning of some of these stories by having a real thing. This gives you a sense, a flattened view of how it looks. And then we look at terrorism. So again, threats to home, and we've broken it down to terror where we live, we work, and play. So this is dealing with the 1920s in the United States, when actually here in Washington, D.C., anarchists set off a bomb on the steps of the home of the Attorney General, which led to sort of overreaction by the FBI and pulling in people, anarchists, communists, a lot of them just immigrants. This is why the ACLU was founded, because of this event called the Palmer Raids. So we tell this story. Where we work, this is the Oklahoma City bombing. And then the last one is the Olympics in '72 when the Israeli athletes were killed. And each of these we talk about more contemporary stories, but those are the key stories there. one area we have here is on interrogation. And so we look at interrogation throughout history with a focus on enhanced interrogation. And we have people involved in developing the program, people who, Malcolm Nance, who's on our board, talking about, he's a SEER instructor, he teaches waterboarding. So we look at, is it torture? Do we do this in the United States? We sort of raise sort of these issues. And so that's, look, this is a waterboarding table. We have Malcolm's waterboarding kit on view. So that's what this section, this is going to be a section, we have a content warning on the outside because it's, you know, it's heavy duty content and families may not want to go in there. So that's this area. The Spy Next Door. If any of you remember, if you've seen The Americans or you remember the Russian 10, back in 2010, the 10 Russians who had been living in the United States for many, many years. They were sleepers and they were rolled up by the FBI and eventually there was a spy trade. And so we talk about sort of the people who might be your neighbors, who live among you, who might be spying. So we look specifically at the story of the Russian 10 and who these people were. But our big gallery down here, our big exhibit down here is on Berlin. It's Berlin during the Cold War. So you'll come in, this is, the outside is Berlin, West Berlin, where you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of expression, and the media is free, and then you go into a street inside Berlin. Now you have two ways, this is what Berlin looks like, this is the outside, and there are these different little rooms that you can go into. So this is the outside, there's a newsstand, there's a faux Berlin Wall, and then we also have two pieces of the Berlin Wall that were donated to us by a county in Germany, in East Germany. That's why they have no graffiti on them, because if you tried to paint some graffiti on a wall in East Germany, you probably would have been arrested or shot. So this is Oberhamel County, so we have those two objects. This is showing them being sent over to us from Germany. And we talk a lot about, we have some peepholes in our wall, and we have some videotape from Germany about the building of the death strip. Because in reality, there were two walls. There was the wall that was on the border of East Germany, and then there was a death strip in between that was filled with traps and guards and dogs, and then it bordered the west side. So you had to cross that if you wanted to try to escape. So we look at deaths at the wall, people who were killed. We look at great escapes, people who managed to escape, and we look at how the wall was built and sort of the technology behind the wall. So we look again at the different successful escape stories, and then in our Berlin, there's two ways you can enter. You can enter by checkpoint. You go through the checkpoint. You got a passport, and we have a checkpoint here with a guard sort of ushering you through. And then we have a secret tunnel, and this is based on a real tunnel story. Ours, unfortunately, is not a tunnel because we couldn't dig, but we have a special effect that you'll see that makes it look like we have a tunnel. But this does tell one of the tunnel stories about people who got in and were bringing people out. So this is the issue of what happens when a security goes too far and creates a surveillance state. So this is telling really the story of the Stasi in East Berlin, and there are these different rooms that you can go into. There's a hotel room that's filled with, if you had gone into East Germany and you were a spy, you'd want to conceal your spy objects, and you were also going to be spied on. So we have objects that are showing how you were spied on and how you would conceal devices that you didn't want people to see. We have a Stasi office where we have some artifacts related to people who were running the Stasi, and sort of, again, some of the thinking that went into it, a lot of the concealment devices. Let's see, this is the hotel room. And then we have an Escape Interactive. And one of the things we've been testing for a number of years with we do an annual Parade of Trabants at the Fall of the Wall Day in November, is an interactive where to get people to have empathy, to feel like, could I have done this? Would I have been willing to go through escaping from a foreign country or from a country to get out? And what would I have been willing to do? So this interactive, this is some of the testing we did. We built a box that was supposed to represent the engine compartment, and we watched people, how they interacted with it. We didn't want people laughing and thinking it was a joke. That's what we wanted to see. So this is Jackie. She's always trying to get into something, our Director of Youth Education. And what we found is people, they did laugh because it's funny to try to fit yourself in here. But more importantly than that, they're like, I couldn't do this. I mean, most people say, I could not be hidden like this with a fear of someone with a gun outside, you know. So it really brought home very physically this challenge so again, trying to bring in some empathy where we can. This is the Stasi office. We have some great artifacts related to Marcus Wolf. He was the head of the Stasi, and he was called the man with no face because no one in the West had ever seen a picture of him. But our board member knew him, and we've got some of his personal effects, including these great antlers, which he had in his office, which had surveillance cameras in them. So this is him, Marcus Wolf. His widow was here last year. The interrogation room, this is the one I was telling you, there's some it's a very tiny room, but it's about, you get to do an interactive about lying and tells for lying, and that's going to be popular, and I think it's going to be a challenging space. Our last exhibit, this is what I think is one of the most interesting exhibits. I wish we had more space for it, but it's economic espionage. We call it spying in the marketplace. But it's all the stuff that you might know about that's in your home, products you use that are the products of a spy story. So everything from porcelain, tea, the color red, indigo, which were ancient or early materials that were the subject of great spying between countries to get great monopolies. And of course, what's interesting is that in early days, everyone was spying on the Chinese because they had these great technologies. And now, of course, the Chinese are spying on us, and we tell some of those stories. We talk about DuPont bioengineered corn, the stealing of that. We talk about titanium dioxide. That's the white that's in Oreos and toothpaste. That is a Monsanto trade secret and how that's been the subject of spying. And we also look at Venice in 1500, because Venice was one of the first countries. It was a superpower of its day, and it had all these great trade secrets. It had glass, it had made mirrors, and they set up the first internal intelligence operation. So we'd sort of tell that story. So this gives you a sense of those galleries, and then you end where you take your RFID badge and you're debriefed, where you'll get a quick summary of how well you did, and then then you'll be able to go home and go in more depth on our microsite. That's it. That gives you a sense. It doesn't look like that right now, but with the screen you'll see gives you a sense of how well you did very, very quickly. I think that's it until we get open in 39 days. Yes.
I'm curious, if someone were to want to read every single thing, experience every single video, how much content is that?
I haven't calculated the hours. It's a really good question. So all the studies that have taken place in museums say that the average visit of any visitor, no matter how big a museum is 2.5 hours.
Right.
That's just what people can tolerate. It doesn't mean someone's not going to spend 5 hours. You could spend 5 hours. So one of the things we've tried to do in the new museum is tell fewer stories, but in a more dramatic and in-depth way. That said, there are lots of stories, and some of them are just 1 or 2 labels long. But in general, we were trying to tell them more in depth. So I am going to calculate how many hours of films we have, how many hours so we'll get that information eventually. But we don't want to scare people.
And one more.
Yeah.
Are you able to share anything on the 3rd floor, what we're hoping to do there?
On the 3rd floor.
Mm-hmm.
So the 3rd floor is where our temporary exhibit space is, and it's where our theater is. So we're not going to have any temporary exhibits until probably a year or 2 out. We're going to work on Operation Spy. For those of you who knew that may be the next thing to open up, but it won't be for at least a year or so, or 2 years, more like it. So that's the 3rd floor. This is the 2nd floor. We've got our classroom. We've got a small space over here for smaller meetings, things like that. And then also, Operation Spy is on the 4th floor. 4th floor. So that's right now. Everybody's storing all their stuff. All the fabricators are storing their stuff in both those spaces. But once we open, we'll be using those spaces for special events until we're ready to have an exhibit, which will be, after that. More questions? It was overwhelming.
I guess we saw like one screen. Do you know how detailed the RFID conclusion, like how detailed it gets to the point where here are your results, to the point of how long a normal guest would spend just reading the
On this one,
conclusion?
it's very short. So it's like it looks at 2 areas, I think, very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the rest of the information you can get from the website.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned we're focusing more on international stories in this iteration than the other one. Why is that difficult?
Yes, so the United States is the most open of any country in the world in terms of putting out intelligence information. So people in other countries study us because we put information out. Other countries do not let out much information. The Brits, they don't. So we really tried hard and we expanded the number of countries we represent at the museum. I think we look at, I think we have 30, I have to look at the number, 40 countries or 50 countries. But it's hard to find a story that doesn't have the U.S. involved in it, whether it's a covert action. But we really tried hard to find, stories that just took place in Brazil, or not easy. So that's why we did the best we could. But that gives you a sense of, again, we tried to expand. We wanted to really make the word international come alive more in our name. The other thing we tried to do when we sat down and thought about what are we going to do, we wanted to broaden the age range. The old museum was really for ages 10 and up. This is still a very highly intellectual museum. There's a lot of heavy-duty content here, but there's a lot of ways to access it for young people, for people with different cognitive abilities. So we've tried to actually put a lot of things for young people spread throughout the museum. So it's much more child-friendly, family-friendly than the old museum. We broadened our historical ranges. The old museum was sort of known as the Cold War and World War II museum. That's because a lot of our artifacts are that period. We definitely tried to push the envelope on both ends. So we don't want people to walk out saying, this museum's just about the Cold War. So, for example, when you go up into the other in section, the looking, listening, sensing, at the end of that gallery, we have a kiosk where you can see some cutting-edge technology that's being developed that can be used in spying application. So we want, again, for people to try to feel like we're up to date as much as possible. I'm trying to think if there's any other things that we cover that we tried to expand on. Yeah, we really did try to sit down and think, what have we learned from all our years working at the museum, from being with guests, and then what do we want to make different and better?
So we don't have timed tickets, correct? It's
No, we
just
do
gonna
have
be-
timed tickets.
It is timed tickets, maximum amount of.
Yeah, we're looking at time tickets every 15 minutes. And that's really, again, to help regulate flow and capacity. And then that goes back to the question on making sure we have a good visitor experience so we can pulse people into the exhibit at times. With our capacity being roughly 480 people per hour, so that's 120 people every 15 minutes. And that, I think, what will help us. If you went to F Street, remember, we had lines around the blocks. So we're jokingly saying, no lines, just times. So that way you show up at your time, a very minimal queue at the lobby, and then you're in to enjoy the exhibit. So you just have to worry about your time, not just waiting around.
We're going to find out a lot of things. We've been working on a very fast timeline to get this museum open and ready, and I know there's going to be a lot of errors. There are going to be things we have to correct, things we're going to discover. So, and you probably will be at the front lines of getting some of that information, or people saying, well, I want to know more about this. We have our 2 historians who, you'll collect information, we'll respond to people, but you'll probably be letting us know, hey, someone said this, someone said that, and up until the day we closed, we found errors in the old museum. Our visitors, either they're professionals or they just know history or whatever it is, are letting us know, which is helpful.
How would the guests interact with the museum to let them know? You could have like comment cards.
Comment cards, Michael?
or internet or?
We'll have a variety of ways, whether it's through SurveyMonkey or digital comment forms. And I think it's something too, day 2, we want to look at working with outside firms like Randy Korn to do more in-depth visitor analysis on the experience. So, like Anna's point, I think the exhibit's going to evolve even after we open.
I thought it was along that same area of, on tag on to how, when people work at my corrections or questions they have, we have something simple as just, paper index cards that people put in
Yeah.
thing. And I can't tell you how much people, for one thing, need valued. If they have something to comment, they can tell us or volunteer, but we go home and we don't ever tell you the fact that they could write it down and simply put it in a box and guess somebody's going to look at it and, respond. And that simple old idea of just writing out a little card has worked incredibly well.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
I think TripAdvisor, other these social medias, we really value that. As our department Guest Services, we had to break it down monthly and report to it. And we actually, at department head meetings, which Anna and I are part of, we would look at visitor comments on their experience before we started the meeting. That was our job. So, that's just one example, but to your point, the visitor feedback really is key. We have to
Because
find
they won't
ways.
go to TripAdvisor to say, I want to correct the spelling in one
Right.
thing
Right.
or that. They won't put that in
All
TripAdvisor. So
forms of
putting on the
feedback.
comment card, well, focuses your attention to look into it further, and then they feel kind of that they've been able to express this and on
Exactly.
an important way.
There was one thing we were able to do at F Street, which I thought was pretty cool.
And we were able to what?
This couple things that we were able to have at F Street and the Old
Uh-huh.
Museum that I thought was pretty cool. I think I was involved in like 2 of them. And that was we had kind of like an autism day, or basically a day where we kind of like were able to shut down certain exhibits, like the ones that were kind of like really high in sounds or noises. Is that more of like a day 2, like we're like years down the road, in case guests do ask about, hey, are you planning on trying to do a day like that again, where you can have people like special needs come in?
Oh,
like,
like, or access to,
Yeah, all
people
access
with
that.
autism. Yes, we've already got one scheduled for the fall, so we will be doing that. Yeah, and we've been working with an ADA consultant to try to make things as accessible as we can. The digital interactives are not going to be accessible for people who are blind, but again, down the road, we hope to have an app and something that will work on that. Can you take them down there?
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Emma.
You're welcome. Happy